Today we're going to be talking about just iteration. And what I mean by iteration is basically like looping. So like things like for loops, while loops we'll be going over and how those work in Java. So first off, just like I said, iteration is basically you can do a bunch of things in sequence to like a block of code. And you can basically just repeat the same block of code over and over again for a certain amount of times. So an technically speaking, an iteration is sort of like one loop around, like running the code once. So if you want to iterate over a piece of code, like say 5 times, that just means like running that piece of code 5 times. All right. So how Java does iteration is basically through looping. So looping in Java is basically you have a specific code inside a loop and I'll iterate it over it for a certain amount of time. So it's basically the same ideas as like iteration. So there are 2 kinds of loops, or there are 2, in general, there are 2 kinds of loops in Java. So the first one is basically like a for loop where, and then the other one is a while loop. These are very similar, like they both do like looping over a block of code, but they're a little bit of like, there's a little bit of a nuance, which will like affect when you want to use a for loop and when you want to use a while loop. So I'm just gonna open up this image, and this is basically a flowchart of a for loop. So basically in a for loop, you have like you have sort of a counter variable. So usually it's called I, and it starts at the value usually 0, but for this one it's 2. A for loop will then do a check like, is I less than or equal to 6 or something like that. If it's true, it'll like perform whatever action you put inside the block. And then next, it'll increment the variable a certain amount of times until this this condition is false, and they'll stop. This will make more sense once we get into like the syntax of a for loop. So I'll come back to that. Any questions about it so far?
Yes. Can you just tell us what exactly that would print out?
Of course. Basically, for this specific loop, we'll start at over here. So start I equals 2. So we have this counter variable called I, and we give it a value of 2. Inside the for loop, it will do a check. So is I less than 6, or is I less than or equal to 6? Right now, the current value of I is 2. So that is true. We'll then do print I plus 1. So we'll print out, yep. Okay, we'll print out.
So what does it print? Does it print 2 or does it print 3? Is it adding 1 to the number?
Yeah, so we'll basically print out what I plus 1 is. So we'll print out 3. And then like afterwards, okay, it'll increment I. So I equals I plus 2. So now I is 4. It'll do this check again. Is I less than or equal to 6? That is true. So then it'll print out I plus 1. So 4 plus 1. So it'll print out 5. And then it'll like continue until I is not less than or equal to 6. So, and then it'll exit the program. Basically, this will just print out, give me a second to like do the math in my head. It'll print out 3, 5, and 7. Okay. Basically. Okay. This will make more sense once I show you like what a for loop looks like in code. But this is sort of just like the general looping structure. So we can like come back to this once I get into like for loop and while loop syntax. Yeah, so next we're just gonna go over like the syntax of a for loop. So in a for loop, you have the 4 parentheses and there are 3 statements. There's like certain rules of like what each of these statements are, but I'll come back to that once we get into like the looping examples. And then inside, like you have the curly brackets, and then you'll have whatever block you want to like loop over. A while loop is a little more simple. It's basically while parentheses, there's like a Boolean condition that you want to check inside the while loop. And then there's like the curly brackets, and then whatever code you want to like go over. So first, let me share you this first looping example. This is just a demo of a for loop. I'll just paste in chat here. Just remember to fork before you change your code. And I'll just go over what this does. So if I just run this, what the code actually does is it'll print basically the counter variable I and hello, like how many times you want. So right now 10 times. Basically in the for loop, you have a counter variable. Usually people will call it I, and then you'll have like a Boolean check as your statement 2. And then your statement 3 is an increment. So let's go back here. So statement 1 is basically you're initializing a counter variable. So the variable to count how many iterations you're gonna go over. So how many times are you gonna loop in this this for loop? So you're gonna initialize it here. The next one is statement 2 is your conditional check. So I less than the maximum amount of times you want to loop over. And then statement 3 is when you increment I. So are you gonna like, is it gonna be like I is gonna increment by 1 each time, or is it gonna like increment by 2? I don't think we've gone over what plus plus means in the primitive section, but plus plus is basically it increments I by 1. There's also like minus minus, which will decrease I by 1. But for now, this basic for loop is like for integer I equals 0. So like the counter is going to start at 0. If I is less than the number of lines that we want to print out. And then at the end of each for loop, I is going to increment by 1. Any questions about this?
Yes. So the logic is if I is less than the number of lines.
Yep.
I guess what I'm wondering is when does the incrementing it I by 1 happen, before or after the printing of the line?
Sure. Let me draw out sort of like a flowchart for this. So basically the general logic is you're going to initialize a counter variable I. And then next, what's going to happen is the Java is going to do a conditional check. So basically what happens is you have int I equals 0. The next thing Java is going to do is it's going to do the statement 2, like the conditional check. So is I less than num lines? Afterwards, it's going to do like the print hello. So it's going to do whatever is happening inside this code block. So this line of code. And then finally, it's going to do I++. So the increment usually happens, the increment happens at the end of each loop. And then it's going to go back and do this conditional check. And then this is like the general structure of the loop. If it turns out that like this conditional, like let's say like you print this out 10 times. So like, and then we're at this point where like over here, I equals 11. If this conditional is false, it will then go and exit the loop. Is that a little more clear? Basically, I don't think this has been explained before, like explicitly in classes, but I would recommend that like basically all semicolons, think of semicolons as like the period at the end of a sentence. So semicolons just determine like it helps Java determine like where the lines of code are, like what is code basically. Should line 12 be empty? Yeah, this is valid code. So basically, for system.out.print line, if you leave it empty, it'll basically print out. It's basically kind of just like pressing enter, and then printing out like an empty line. If you want to like, yeah, basically it'll print out just the empty line, and it'll like skip to the next line. So basically for this, this will print out basically 0, hello, 1, hello. It'll print it, all of that out up until 9. It won't print out 10 hello because I haven't put the I less than or equal to num line. So it'll only print out when I is 0 to 9. There's also like this other trick. So basically for loops, we have these 3 statements, right? You can actually leave some of these statements blank. So if I like initialize integer like j outside over here, I can actually leave this first statement blank because j has already been initialized somewhere else in the code. This is just something to keep in mind. I wouldn't recommend like actually doing it this way just because it makes your code unreadable. But in case like you see it in other people's code, this is valid code basically. Any questions about this?
I have a different question about why can't you just print ln left parenthesis? Why can't you just print j itself? Why do you have to put integer period to string in front of it?
Basically, so string and integers are different types, and Java is a little peculiar about like what types can you sort of like add together. So
okay, it's because you're adding it to that other string. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you were just printing the number and you didn't have another string in there, could you just say print ln left paren j right paren? Can you do that, or can you? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, I think like so Java will. I'm actually not too sure like if Java will get angry if I wait. Let me actually try this. So sometimes Java will get angry if you like try to add an integer to a string, and sometimes it won't. It's just very peculiar about like when you're like adding 2 types together. So right now it's like it's fine with it. So this is like technically you can do this. I just like being careful and like doing integer.toString and converting into a string because some languages are like some languages just won't like this. But like other languages like Java and Python, they may or may not be flexible with this. This might not work for like other types. So if I have like a double, maybe it won't work. This is just personally like I like doing like the string conversion because like I've worked with other languages where like doing just like j plus 5 will like make the compilers mad. But like it's just my habit. So I was gonna come back and like explain this, but I guess like my explanation like drawing out the all right. So next, let's just move on to the while loop demo then. So for while loop, it's not exactly like a for loop where you have like 3 statements. It's like a little bit complicated. A while loop is just the while keyword, parentheses with a conditional check in it, and then your brackets with your code in it. So let's just move on to this while loop demo. Basically over here we have like a while loop where that takes in like user input. So we first like scan in the user input. If the user input is not 5, will just print out basically whatever you type in. So to do a quick demo, once this runs, this will basically be like, I can like type in like random gibberish, and then it'll basically just print out whatever I type. Except when I print out by, it'll just print out by and it'll exit this while loop and the code. So basically, what's happening here is just whenever we like run this while loop, for each loop, we'll do this conditional check. While this conditional is true, we'll continue looping over this. And then once it's false, we'll exit the loop. Any questions about this? So we have a question in chat. So this code is to reprint the user input. Exactly. All this code does is it'll echo back whatever you typed in. So if I be over here, it'll first print out the original user input, ASDF, but then this line 14 basically changes user input to uppercase and reassigns it to user input. And then once I run the same like print statement as line 12, you'll see that it's like all caps. I can also like add something outside the while loop. So let's say like system dot print line outside. For a while loop, it's pretty simple. All you have is like a single conditional check. So is user input equal to by? Remember that like this is actually, let me erase this because this is pretty confusing, or it can be pretty confusing. Is user input by, basically. This is like the question. While this is true, we'll like execute code in loop, and then it'll loop back. So while this is true, it'll continue in this cycle. If it's not true, it'll exit the loop. So then the question becomes like, what code is this? So like, what code is going to be executing the loop? And just like with the for loop, it's everything inside of the curly brackets. So we'll just like run all of these lines of code in sequence. Does that make it a little clearer?
Yeah.
Sweet. The general rule for Java is anything inside of curly brackets counts as its own block of code. So semicolons basically denote like statements, sort of like sentences, and curly brackets are kind of like paragraphs. So this is a block of code, and everything inside of like the curly brackets in the main statement or in the main method also counts as its own block of code. So basically, yeah, this is all we've gone over for like the for loops. So we have like statement 1 is like the initializing the counter variable. Statement 2 is just like the conditional check, and statement 3 is the incrementation, or I don't think that's a word. It's like it increments basically the counter. I don't know. Do you guys want to like do this example, or basically this will just print everything like 1, 2, 3, but not 4. And then while loop, again, it's just like you have a while and then a conditional check, and they'll perform everything inside the curly brackets. The thing for a while loop to watch out though is notice that unlike for loop, there isn't really a fail-safe where like you have a counter and there's like a specific there's a specific number of loops that can like go, like there's a specific number of iterations you can basically go through. So notice that in for loops, I have like this counter variable that keeps track of like how many times can I like go over this code. But in while loops, we don't have that. So when you're writing with a while loop, just be very careful that you aren't accidentally making an infinite loop. So in this example, we've created our own like counter variable I, and we keep track of that like inside the while loop conditional. You can also have things like, just like in the demo code where it's like while the user doesn't input by, I'll like keep on running this loop, but there's like a definite condition where like this while loop ends. And so like just make sure that you aren't actually creating a situation where like you can't exit the loop. And that is like a really common mistake for while loops. It can happen in for loops, but for loops are generally like, that's like, it's rare in that case. So I think we only have like 20 minutes left. So you can like go over this example on your own. It's kind of similar to like the demos, but like they have this counter variable and they're doing the conditional check and they're incrementing. So if like you're writing code like this, make sure you always increment your counter every time. So next, we're just going to go over 2 important keywords for looping. So the first one is break. If you remember from the switch statement, break basically exits something for you. So in the case of loops, break will basically break you out of the loop. And then continue is just sort of a way to skip something in looping. So continue is just like, I'm going to the next iteration. I'm not going to like do whatever else is in the code after the continue. Any questions about this? All right, so I'm gonna first do the continue demo, and we can check out this code. So basically in this case, I have like a for loop where I'm basically gonna have a counter. So wait. So I have this first integer called counter. That's not part of this for loop. And then inside the for loop, I'm gonna loop over this 10 times, except I'm gonna skip 3. And I'm gonna continue with 3. The other code is like, basically, other than that, I'm gonna just add, I'm gonna increment my counter. So what's happening is basically counter this loop should run 10 times, but because I'm skipping 3, the counter should only count up to 9. So I equals, sorry, just a moment. Let me grab my drawing tablet again. So basically I equals 0. And then in this case of this for loop, the conditional is I is less than 10. And then I'm going to increment counter if counter isn't 3. And then I'm going to continue looping over. What's basically
so you increment the counter, and then you check if counter, you increment the counter first. So you're coming down and you said I is less than 10. The first thing you do is increment the counter to 1. Right?
Not
Is that what
exactly.
you're saying?
So
and then after incrementing it, you check to see if the counter is equal to 3, is not equal to 3.
No. So what's happening is basically For code, you always read code top down. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm checking if I equals 3. If I equals 3, I'm printing out the statement that I'm skipping 3. And then I'll continue. What continue does is it'll basically ignore everything at the bottom here, and it'll just go to the next loop.
Continue will ignore the increment.
Yeah, basically.
Continue ignores the increment.
Yeah, it'll basically ignore everything that's after it inside of the loop. So everything that's like after this continue, it'll basically skip over once I hit the continue keyword. The general gist of this code is I'm counting each time like the loop is run. So if the if statement wasn't here, this counter would be 10 because I went over the loop 10 times, right? However, once I have this check, like if I goes 3, print out, I'm skipping 3 and then continue. What's happening is it'll skip over the third. How does this makes it a lot more clear? So like basically when I goes 3, it'll just like it'll just skip everything after the continue. So continue basically like it's nothing super like complicated. It's just like anything after the continue keyword is just skipped over. Any other questions? Is it okay if I move on from this one?
Yes.
Sweet. All right. And then the last demo I'm going to show is the break demo. So break will basically break you out of the loop. It's pretty useful like in certain conditions. So like I remember I said like, remember when I said in while loops, like you generally want to like want to avoid like infinite loops where it isn't possible for like whatever condition you're tracking to be false. But that's kind of like not exactly accurate. So there are actually times where you want to loop infinitely over something. Think about like at any time you like run a program, your code never like when I'm running this browser, it doesn't just run once and exit, right? It's like here for like until I exit out of it, like by pressing the X button. What's happening is this program is actually running on an infinite loop. And then there's like somewhere in the infinite loop, like when I click on this, like X button and close the program, it'll like break out of that loop. And this is like sort of what's happening here. So I have this infinite loop. While true, I'll run this code. And in this code, like you don't have to worry too much about like what exactly I'm like doing. So like basically I'm like whenever I type in something, I'll basically like either repeat it back or like if it's something in the switch statement, I'll type in a response or something, or like the program will give me back a response. So say like I type in hi, it'll like print out hello, stuff like that. This is just like another example of a switch statement if you want to like check it out. The more important part is I also have the ability to break out of this infinite loop. So when I type in bye, the system will basically print out bye and it will just exit this while loop. So it's sort of really similar to the first while loop we saw. So it's the same idea of like, if I print out bye, I'll basically exit the loop. Any questions about this? There isn't a condition that this is checking. If I like, let's say I didn't have this, let's say I didn't have this break, this will run forever. This like, it won't stop until like the program crashes and runs out of memory or something. So this will run forever, theoretically.
Okay.
However, like if you want like an infinite statement like this, you should always include like a way to exit, right? And that way to exit is a break statement. So this break will basically break you out of this infinite loop. Is that like a little more clear? So think about like, for example, this web browser. I don't want it that like when I click on this web browser, it will just like run once and then exit on me, right? I don't want it so that it like opens for like 2 seconds and then it will just exit the code. I want it to run over a period of time so that I can like use it and like interact and go online and stuff. So all like programs that run over a period of time, even Zoom, it'll run on something like an infinite loop where like it'll run forever. But like if there's a condition where like I press X to exit, it'll like break out that infinite loop.
Okay.
Yeah. There are like definitely other ways to sort of like emulate that. Like you can like also do something like this where like while user input doesn't equal like 5 or something like that, I'll keep on running it. But this is like just another way to like do it. And it also just shows like what a break statement is. Unfortunately, we only have like 1 minute left, but you guys can definitely like, I would recommend you go over like the quiz questions just as practice. And I think Willa already posted like all the links to like the workshop if you want to do it, submission and feedback.